Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to dive into the night when Tuna is forced to call the police on her ex-husband's family after they secretly take baby Henry, and CEO Alex finally draws a hard line to protect them. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episodes. Night inside the station felt colder than the wind outside. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and every step on the tiles echoed. On a metal bench against the wall, Tuna sat hunched forward, both arms locked around Henry, as if someone might rip him away the second she loosened her grip. Henry had finally stopped crying, but his tiny chest still hitched now and then. His lashes were stuck together with dried tears, his cheeks blotchy. Even in sleep, his little fist stayed twisted in her shirt, like he was silently begging, "Don't let go." Every time he twitched, Tuna's arms tightened. She bent her head close, repeating the same broken line, half to him, half to herself. "It's okay. Mommy's here. I'm sorry, Henry. I'm so sorry." A few steps away, Alex leaned against the wall, hands clasped in front of him. His shirt was still crisp, his hair still neat, the image of a CEO you'd expect to see in an office, not a police station. But his face gave him away. The skin around his eyes was tight, his jaw clenched and unclenched. And every minute or so, his gaze flicked up to the clock, then back down to the sleeping child, as if he had to keep checking Henry was still there. The heavy door to the investigator's room opened with a tired creak. Huang An came out first. His clothes were wrinkled and greasy, like he'd been wearing them for days. His eyes had that wild, cornered look of a man buried under debt and humiliation, but still too stubborn to admit he was wrong. Behind him shuffled his mother, once Tuna's mother-in-law. Her back was bent, gray threading through her hair, but the sharpness in her eyes was still there. Tangled with guilt and wounded pride, an officer followed them out, a folder tucked under his arm. He stopped in the middle of the room, making sure they were all looking at him before he spoke. "All right," he said calmly. "I'm going to repeat the conclusion so everyone hears it clearly." He nodded toward Huang An and his mother. "You two admit that you took the child from the farm without asking the mother's permission. Whatever you were thinking, that action is wrong. You've signed a written commitment that from this moment on, you will not take the child anywhere or approach him without his mother's consent. If this happens again, we will consider criminal charges. Next time, it won't just be a warning." "Yes, I understand. Thank you, officer," Tuna whispered. Her throat burned. She bowed her head and pulled Henry closer, as if all that really mattered now was keeping him in her arms. Alex dipped his head too. "Thank you for your help," he said quietly. On the surface, it was polite. But tonight had shown him exactly how far the other side was willing to go, and a plan was already forming for what he'd do if they tried this again. He had barely straightened up when a harsh, mocking laugh cut through the silence. "Bravo, CEO Alex," Huang An said loudly, clapping once in slow sarcasm. "Drag the police into someone else's family business. Must feel very righteous, huh? Got money, got a title, got connections. Now you think you get to decide who can see their own child?" Alex turned his head toward him, his face smoothed out, expression going flat. He didn't lunge or shout. He simply pushed off the wall and walked closer, each step controlled and steady. "Family business," he repeated softly. "That's what you're calling it?" He is my son, Huang An shot back, jabbing a finger toward Henry. My blood. My family. Who are you exactly? Some stranger who gave them a place to stay for a few months and now thinks he's a hero? I might have nothing now, but you will always just be an outsider. The word outsider hit the air like a slap. On the bench, Tuna flinched, and Henry let out a tiny whimper in his sleep. Alex didn't look away. When you and your family threw her out of your house while she was pregnant, he said quietly, did you remember she was your wife then? He didn't give Huang An time to answer. When she stood outside your gate with nowhere to go, nowhere to sleep, did you remember she was carrying your blood? When she passed out on the roadside because no one would help her? Who put her in a car and took her to the clinic? Who signed the papers? Who paid the bill? He took another step closer. His voice stayed low, but there was a sharpness under it now. When she had nowhere to take that baby home to, who opened up an old farm, poured concrete, bought a fan and a light bulb and said, stay here, rest, I'll help you work so you can raise your child? You want to talk about who abandoned their family and who showed up for them? His eyes didn't leave Huang An's. Are you sure you want to have that conversation with me? Huang An's mouth opened, but no words came. Color climbed up his neck, a messy mix of shame and anger he couldn't turn into a comeback. Beside him, his mother suddenly burst into tears. I only wanted to see my grandchild, she cried, rubbing at her face with the back of her hand. He's my grandson. He carries our surname. I'm old, I live alone. I just wanted to hold him, bring him home for a while, let him drink some milk, sleep in a proper bed. I didn't hurt him. Why are you all treating me like I'm a criminal? Alex turned to her. His tone softened, but his body didn't shift. Auntie, he said, if you really just wanted to visit him, you could have come to the farm in the daytime. Knock on the door. Tell Tuna you miss him. Ask to hold him. No one is trying to erase you as his grandmother. He drew in a slow breath. But tonight, you waited until she stepped out for a moment. Then you took the baby and left without a word. That's not visiting. That's taking someone's child behind their back. The law doesn't look at intention, it looks at action. The officer nodded, backing him up. That's exactly right, he said. Loving your grandchild doesn't mean you can ignore his mother. Next time you want to see the boy, talk it out like adults. No more sneaking. For a moment, the room went quiet again. Papers signed, rules explained. On the surface, this should have been the end of it. Everyone goes home. Everyone behaves. But the hurt sitting inside Huang An wasn't ready to let go. Huang An shifted his weight and leaned to the side so he could see past Alex. And you, he said, his voice turning hard. You called the police on the woman who used to be your mother-in-law. Tomorrow, when the whole village whispers that you're ungrateful, that you turned on the family that once took you in, can you handle that? I was a bad husband, fine, I admit it. But did you really have to drag things this far? His words weren't loud, but they hit like blows. Henry stirred and let out a small, frightened cry. At once, Tuna's hand started patting his back in shaky little circles, as if she could shield him from every sound in the room. For a long second, she couldn't lift her head. Her eyes stayed on the floor, on the scratched tiles, on the scattered shadows. Old fears rose up in her chest like smoke, fear of gossip, of being judged, of once again being called ungrateful and heartless. Then she drew in a breath that felt like it scraped her lungs. I am scared, she said quietly. The officer stopped moving. Alex glanced at her. Even the buzzing lights seemed to fade into the background. "I'm scared of what people will say," she continued. "That I'm bad, that I'm ungrateful, that I don't know how to respect the people who once let me live in their house. I'm scared they'll say I turned my back on the family I married into." Her eyes shone, but this time the tears sat on top of something steadier. "But I'm more scared," she said, voice tightening, "of coming home and finding my baby gone, of calling his name and hearing nothing, of running from room to room, lifting every blanket, opening every door, and not seeing him anywhere." She shook her head slowly. "That feeling?" she whispered. "I never want to feel that again. Not even one more time." Silence fell over the room. "Back then," she went on, finally raising her eyes to Huang An, "when you and your mother told me to leave while I was pregnant, did you worry about what people would say about me? Did you care if anyone thought you were cruel? Or were you just relieved that once I walked out, you wouldn't have to deal with me and the baby anymore?" Her tone stayed low, but every sentence carried the weight of nights she'd cried alone. "I left with nowhere to go," she said. "I didn't stand at your gate and scream. I didn't drag your name through the mud. I kept quiet because I was weak and scared. I thought if I disappeared, everyone could breathe easier." She adjusted Henry in her arms and straightened her back. "But now there's Henry," she said. "I'm not just someone's wife or ex-wife, I'm his mother. If I don't protect him, who will?" The question hung between them, and there was no answer that made him look any less guilty. Huang An's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. He took one angry step forward, driven by old habits more than reason. He didn't get any closer. The instant he moved, Alex stepped fully in front of him. A solid wall between the bench and the man who had just been warned. He didn't shove. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, shoulders squared, making it clear that this was as far as Huang An would go tonight. "That's enough," Alex said, voice low but steady. He didn't need to shout. The calm in his tone did all the work. "You need to listen carefully, Huang An," he continued. "Tonight, the police gave you a warning. I'm giving you mine." Alex's gaze didn't waver for even a second. "From now on," he said, "if you or anyone in your family shows up at the farm to harass, threaten, or try to take Henry without his mother's permission, I won't stop at a simple report. I'll bring my lawyer. I'll ask for full legal protection orders. And I'll push this case as far as the law allows." The air seemed to grow heavier. A bitter smile twisted across Huang An's face. "Fine," he muttered. "Remember my face, CEO. I'm not going to disappear from their lives that easily." Before he could throw out another threat, the officer stepped forward, voice turning sharp. "I'd be very careful with what you say next," the officer warned, "because I can add verbal threats to the official record too, if that's what you'd like." For a moment, the fire in Huang An's eyes flickered. His shoulders dropped a little. His mother tugged his sleeve, whispering for him to stop. This time, he let her pull him away. They turned and walked toward the door. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading until the station felt too quiet. Only the hum of the lights and Henry's uneven breathing remained. The door closed behind them with a dull, final thud. Alex let out a slow breath and turned back to the bench. He walked over and crouched down so his eyes were level with Tuna's. Up close, she looked completely drained. Her face was pale, her lips dry, her eyes swollen and glassy. She held Henry so tightly, it was as if her arms alone were holding her together. "Hey," he said softly. She blinked and focused on him, like she had to drag herself back from somewhere far away. Tonight was rough, he said. Really rough, but it doesn't end here. For a moment, she just stared at him. In her mind, the only image that existed was the empty bed and the way the world had gone silent around her. He kept his tone calm, giving her something solid to grip onto. Tomorrow, Alex continued, we'll talk to a lawyer. My legal team will explain exactly what your rights are and what we can do to protect you and Henry. We'll put cameras around the farm. We'll tell the people who live and work nearby what happened, so they can keep an eye out too. If anything feels wrong again, you won't be alone with it. Her fingers pressed gently against Henry's back. And if there has to be arguing, he added, if anyone comes to yell, accuse, pressure, or scare you, I'll be the one standing in front. You don't have to face them by yourself anymore. Her expression shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip just a little. Alex, she whispered, I didn't want to drag you into this. I didn't want people to say you were meddling in their family business. When I came back and the bed was empty and Henry wasn't there, her voice cracked. The rest of the sentence fell apart. I know, he said quickly. You don't have to say it, I know. He glanced down at Henry, then back up at her. You did the right thing, Alex said firmly. Calling the police, asking for help, protecting your child. None of that is wrong. People can talk all they want, but the law is on your side, and so am I. She swallowed. What if they say I'm ungrateful? She asked. That I used you? That I hid behind your money and your position to fight them? A faint, tired smile touched his lips. If anyone wants to say that, he replied, they can say it to me directly. His tone was calm, but there was steel underneath. I'm not afraid of people talking, he said. I'm afraid of you and Henry being in danger. If I have to choose between their opinion and your safety, I'll choose your safety every single time. Let them gossip. They weren't there when you were standing outside that gate, and they weren't here tonight when you thought your child was gone. Her shoulders shook once, part fear, part relief. You're his mother, Alex said gently. Your job is to protect him. My job, if you'll let me, is to protect both of you. He let that settle between them. From now on, he added, if anyone wants to come after you, they can plan on going through me first. The station was still too bright and too white, but something in the space around them had changed, like a thin shield had risen around mother and child. Henry gave a tiny sigh, his small fingers finally loosening their grip on her shirt. Without thinking, Alex reached out and brushed his knuckle lightly along the baby's arm. Come on, he said softly. Let's get you home. The word home no longer meant the house she'd been thrown out of. It meant the old farm with its patched walls and buzzing fan, turned into a safe place simply because he had opened it for her. She nodded. Alex stood and offered his hand. She shifted Henry carefully and placed her free hand in his. His grip was steady as he helped her up from the cold metal bench. As they walked toward the exit, the officer called after them, reminding them about the signed commitment and the consequences if it was broken. Alex nodded once in acknowledgement. At the door, just before they stepped outside, he glanced at her again. Whatever comes next, he said, you're not fighting alone anymore. The door opened, and cool night air brushed her face. It was still cold, but it didn't feel quite as cruel. She held Henry close, felt Alex walking solidly beside her, and for the first time since the nightmare began, she let herself breathe a little easier. One terrifying night at the police station, Tuna clings to baby Henry after her ex-husband's family secretly takes him from the farm. In front of the officer, they're forced to admit their wrongdoing and sign a commitment. But Huang An still lashes out, accusing Tuna of being ungrateful. For the first time, she speaks up, choosing her child's safety over village gossip. CEO Alex calmly confronts Huang An, draws a clear legal line, and promises to shield both mother and son. They leave the station exhausted, but no longer alone in this fight. It marks a turning point in their fragile new family.